I'd never examined myself that closely and why I was doing what I was doing and how I was doing what I was doing and what I truly wanted. And I think I'd been sprinting for such a long time that was really comfortable. And now that I no longer had to sprint, what did that mean? And could I choose a separate set of beliefs and habits? And could I live a life that wasn't just, a dopamine cortisol onslaught constantly?
Welcome back to another episode of Good Work. I'm your host, Barrett Brooks. On this show, I dive deep with world-class creators, founders, artists, and adventurers about the inner journey of outward success. In my work, I've learned that beyond a certain level of success, there are no roadmaps or universal tactics to follow. There's only your instincts and the courage to forge your own path. That's what this show is about, the unique challenges and opportunities that come from becoming world-class at what you do. My job is to ask the questions no one else has, so my guests can tell their stories in a way they've never been told. My hope is that this results in a deeper, more thoughtful, and more human conversation than you can hear anywhere else. My guest on the show today is Tina Tower. Tina is the founder of Her Empire Builder, which is a membership community helping women build and scale online course businesses. But her journey to this moment has been anything but linear. From launching a tutoring center at the age of 20 to scaling a franchise business that nearly broke her, to selling that business in a deal that taught her some hard lessons, Tina has lived through the highs and the lows of entrepreneurship. And along the way, she's had to repeatedly ask herself, what am I really building here? And is it even worth it? This conversation with Tina is packed with insights for anyone navigating your own growth as a leader and an entrepreneur. Here's what you'll get from listening to this episode. First, what Tina learned from scaling a business in an unsustainable way and how you can avoid the same mistakes as you're building your business or career. Second are some of the hard truths Tina learned about selling a company and how to avoid an earnout contract that leads you to throw a tantrum in the office of your new boss. And finally, how Tina went from being trapped in a high-stress business to running a wildly profitable $2 million a year company with less stress, more joy, and more impact than ever before, which was something she didn't think possible just a few years ago. So if you've ever wrestled with how to balance building wealth, meaning, and a lifestyle you actually want with your work, I think you're going to love this episode. Let's get to it. Tina Tower, welcome to the show.
I am so excited to be here.
Excited to have you. I thought I'd start with who or what is Bobby Bear?
Oh, so funny. Okay, so you probably already covered this intro-wise, but it's a different thing being interviewed by someone who was previously your coach. The questions will be very different to any questions that I've ever been asked before, and then boom, straight off the gate, there he goes. So Bobby Bear, I won't go and get it. He is a bear that I opened with my very first business. So I started my business when I was 20, which was an educational toy store and tutoring center. And when I opened that very first box of all of the stock that came, the first thing I took out was a Bobby Bear. And so he has sat on my shelf ever since. And it was 20 years in November.
20 years you've been an entrepreneur. In this first half of the conversation, I really want to talk about kind of your rise. And I see it as like this dual peaked rise before we even met, where you had this early chapter where you were building this tutoring center and toy store that were connected and that became something big. And then you moved from that into a new business that you now run that's not so new anymore, obviously. And I want to talk about both those things, but I don't think it would fully capture your story if we didn't go back and get some of the early innings that you talk about in your first book, One Life. And you had a really challenging go of it in your early teenage years. And I wonder if you might just tell us kind of what led up to this moment when you decided to leave home and go out on your own for the first time.
Yeah. Well, talking about the rise, I think it's the rise, the fall, the rise, the fall, the rise, the fall, many, many times. But so as a teenager, I had a bit of a rough childhood. My parents divorced when I was really young, just before my first birthday, and they hated each other. the entire time. So that made, I know it's a very familiar story for a lot of people, but it created a lot of animosity. They would take each other to court all the time and change my names. My name changed 7 times when I was a kid. So every year I'd arrive at school and teachers would say, "Who are you this year?" Like, I don't know. And then once I got to my teenage years, I was who I am now. I think I was a little bit of a firecracker and probably more challenging than what my parents would like. And the way that my personality was and the way that their personality was created quite a kaboom. And so when I was 14, my house was quite violent and emotionally abusive. And so I left. I did the whole child runaway thing when I hit 14. I slept in the back of a fruit shop for a couple of nights until one of my girlfriends at school told her mum. Her mum came and got me. I stayed at her house for a few weeks. I was then taken to my dad's house, who I didn't know very well at that point. It had been quite a few years since we'd really seen each other. But he had, a very typical story for separated families. He had his new wife and his new family there. And after about a year, I was too disruptive to that life. So I was just dropped back to my mum's house. So that really did shape a lot of things and mess with me for a really, really long time. Probably still messes with me now in different ways.
Yeah. One of the things I see in my work with my clients and even in so many of the stories on this podcast of people who are wildly successful at what they do, including you, is that we all still go through these early chapters where we receive messages and we learn stories that may or may not be true about who we are. And you talk about some of these stories and how you reflect back now on that time. You couldn't see them maybe at the time, from the age of 14 or 18, even obviously. But what were some of those stories or things that you internalized about yourself that you now realize weren't yours to carry back then?
It's so funny because you asked me that question. I'm like, the answer to this, Barrett. You know the answer to this so well. So what that did to me then, I found personal development like some people would find religion at that age. So about 16, I saw Tony Robbins for the first time. I had amazing, amazing teachers at school. And one of the teachers put me in for this Tony Robbins seminar in Sydney that was happening. And then I kind of, when he did his rah-rah, if you can dream it, you can achieve it. I was like, hooked, sold. I want that for myself. So then I went down like Robert Kiyosaki and John D. Martini and all of those different roads, and really took on the, if it is to be, it's up to me, and I will outwork everybody, and I will get myself out of this situation, and I will never rely or trust another person again. Like all of those were the very early stories that I held that drove me for a really long time. And in a way, it served me beautifully as a young person. Like it gave me a sense of determination and drive, that to the point where when I had my children, I was actually researching successful people that had not been through messed up childhoods, because I was going, is it possible? Like so many successful people I know had this like unhealthy drive at the start. And I was going, is it possible without it? Or am I going to mess up my kids by not messing them up? So it's been an interesting journey. And like you said, a lot of it in the early days, I didn't realize were stories at all. I wasn't, I had no self-examination through my 20s. I just sprinted as hard and fast as I possibly could.
Yeah. It became a really powerful motivator for you, I know, to get yourself out of those circumstances. But as I was reading back through your book, it was just so fascinating to see, you described it as emotionally abusive, and that's what it was. It was like being torn down so that you could be built back up, to be torn down, to be built back up by your parents, and them kind of expressing their disdain for each other at you, and how unfair that was and how much of that burden you carried at the time. I think you described it as it wasn't designed to do anything. They were just trying to meet their own needs, of course. And in their own way, they loved you, even if they couldn't show it in the ways you needed. But I wonder how that just lived in you, like what burdens you carried from that in terms of being small, or telling yourself that you weren't worthy of certain things, or, You talk about some of these things, and I just wonder if you might share how you carried those.
Gosh, you ask the deep questions, don't you, Barrett? Like, yeah, I've missed our coaching together and having to think about all of this on a regular basis. Thanks. So I think, like you said, like my mum in particular was probably my biggest supporter and my biggest like downgrader. And I think if you've never had a person like that in your life, it can be really hard to understand. But she wanted me to be exceptional. I have 5 brothers, and the amount of time she would say to me, like, I just don't want you to be a useless girl. You have to be better than your brothers because life's going to be harder for you. And so in a way, she gave me that toughness and the ability to be able to do a lot of the things that my peers couldn't do. I certainly could never use being a girl as an excuse. I guess with what stuck a lot from that was the uselessness I would feel if I wasn't being productive, if I wasn't having massive output. She would say I was just useless and lazy if we were doing that, and we were there to be of service and to get out there and to create more and be more. And then when I would be successful and when I would get there, she would do something to just like cut it straight out from under me and like, don't get too big for your boots. Don't you think you're all that? Get the plum out of your mouth. Like, don't forget where you came from. You'd have nothing without me. Like all of those different things that would build me up to feel like I could achieve anything and anything was possible. But then just like that, it was all going to disappear and I was actually worthless and had nothing there, which is, it sounds sad saying it out loud now, but yeah, it is.
I think it honors it in a way, though, because I think it's so easy to ignore these parts of our story and just to kind of say, well, we all go through hard things or everyone has their version of this. And it's like, yes, exactly. Yeah. We all have a version of this.
Yeah.
Everyone that I see, whether even if they had a very healthy relationship to their family, we have stories we carry that don't serve us, and you can just see them popping off for you just now, the way you're able to bring them back.
Yeah.
I think being able to reclaim the parts of our story that are ours and being able to confidently let go of the parts that aren't is such a huge part of growing up, and reaching our potential and finding what we're capable of. You move on and you enter into university, and you've got these kind of 2 sources of story. One is this kind of personal development, religion, as you put it, or alternative to religion, as you put it, which is a really uplifting, positive psychology, kind of like you can do it type message. And then you've also got this history where it's like, but don't get too big for your britches and really make sure you stay humble and don't be useless. These things can be interesting complements to each other. And these are some of the ingredients that you're going into university with, and you're working extremely hard at the time, multiple jobs, putting your way through, and you see a sign one day that says tutoring, $40 an hour. How did that sign change the approach you were taking to paying for your university?
Yeah. So up until that point, I saw more work as the answer to everything. And I mean, bless the energy of late teens, early 20s, right? Like what I would give for that now. I always think it's so cruel that when I had all that energy, I was like, I had no idea. I was running in a million different directions, like trying to discover. And now I go, I have the ability to create so much with so much less, but don't have that any. I'm like, gosh, if we had that then. But anyway, that's the part of getting older and wiser, right? So back in the early days, I was working through year 11 and 12, like the last parts of high school. I was working 3 different jobs, pretty much from very early morning, about 6 o'clock in the morning, sometimes earlier, until about midnight. I was either working or at school. I had very little for anything else. I didn't give much time to friendships. I didn't give much time to help. Like that was it. That was I had very singular focus. And then when I started uni, my first year in uni, I actually went into a business degree because I was really interested in business and was told by a lecturer that I wasn't serious enough for the business world and should look at something different. So that's why I switched into teaching, which I did really feel aligned with because I had such great teachers and wanted to do that. But teaching and it didn't make me enough money. And so that was my concern. And teachers, like in the education system, you have the most beautiful, dedicated, wonderful teachers. But then there's also some teachers that are terrible, that should not be in the system there at all. And it really pained me that you could work twice as hard as the teacher next to you and have double the impact, but you were always going to get the same.
Mm-hmm.
But that was kind of the hard part of the choice at that time into what to do. And so I was really looking for what that pathway was going to be, and I didn't think it was going to be traditional. But even though I'd been around all the personal development, I was making money by doing people's essays on the side because I was really good at English. And so I would get paid to write people's essays. But other than that, I hadn't really found like my entrepreneurial thing yet. And then one day I was walking down the street, like you said, and I saw a sign for tutoring for $40. And the most I was getting paid for any of the jobs that I was working at that time was $17, which was my most highly paid overnight, overtime kind of rate. And so I walked in, I was like, $40, like I could do, that's incredible. Imagine just being able to sit there with a child, teach them and get $40. Like that's awesome. So, things escalated from there, which has been my pattern in life, that I will have an idea and go, that's a good idea. And then shit gets out of hand after that. So I did think I would just be a tutor and go to people's homes. But then I saw a space for rent that I loved in the main street. So I thought, yeah, I'll do a whole center and we can do that there. But then it was too big. So I thought, well, let's use all the space and we'll do an educational toy store at the same time. And that is how it started.
So you're a university student. You're 20? 19?
Yeah.
Okay, you're 20. And you walk by a sign that says $40 an hour for tutoring. And your response to this idea of I can make $40 an hour is I'm going to rent thousands of square feet of retail space and open a tutoring center. Yeah. And since it's too big for just tutoring, I'll open a toy store too.
Yeah. Because if you can dream it, you can achieve it. So there was the good stories and the bad.
So you build out the space, you get the funding, you go through all of this process to actually do the thing at 20 years old. And this is where Bobby Bear comes in, right? You're opening this toy store in the front of the store, and how much what was the process? What inventory did you order? What were you going through?
Yeah. So it was, naivety is bliss. Like, I am so glad I didn't understand the responsibility and ramifications of the decisions that I was making at the time. But I had saved up $8,000 to that point. So I had $8,000 to open the shop. I thought that was so much money that I had saved up. And then in the fit out, we did the gyp rocking and the front counter, and it was gone. And so it's like, okay, well, this is a problem. But the good part about retail is they will give you things on like a 60 or 90-day account. And so I went and bought all of these toys. There's like big toy fairs that happen, and you can go and basically have the best shopping experience of your life and just add all of this stuff to cart and not pay for it. And so all of that got delivered to the shop, and I knew I had those bills due in 60 days. And so that was really this hustle of going, all right, like this is how much I've got to do every day. This is what I need to be doing so that I can make those bills. And I had a beautiful, beautiful landlord. I got so lucky with that. He was this man who was close to 80 at the time that I took the lease, and he owned about 60 of the buildings in our suburbs. So he'd done very well for himself, but he luckily had a bit of a soft spot for me and like admired the gumption that I had, I think. And so he would often give me extensions on the rent, or I would go to him and go like, Fred, this is how I'm going. I think I'll be able to pay it on the 17th, but it's due on the 1st. And he would say yes every time. So I kind of got those extensions, which was really, really lucky. When the taxes were due, I got extensions on the tax office. And basically for the following 4 years, that's how my life operated, in just never having enough to get ahead, but just making it every time, like just hanging on, which was stressful, but also, I think of it now and I don't know how I wasn't more stressed about it. It just seemed like it was part of the game that I was playing and what I was working through. But yeah, I certainly didn't hit early business success.
You picked a hard business to do it in, retail locations and everything is tough. But there came an important moment about 4 years in, as I understand it, when things started to change. So what happened there?
I had a baby. So I did everything quite early. I got married at 21, and then I had my first baby at 24. So when Kai was born, I still had the store. By that stage, I had finished uni. So I finished uni about year 2, year 3 into the business. And so by the time I finished uni, there was no way I was going into the classroom. I loved what I did. So things got infinitely easier after that because I could not have to hire as many staff all the time. I could just do all the shifts myself, which was good. But then when I had Kai, I know this sounds ridiculous, especially like all women have a different experience of having babies. And I was very lucky in that I had very, very easy pregnancies. I birthed these, I had good babies that slept well. And I think they didn't have a choice but to sleep well because mama needed her sleep, But he came to the shop with me every day. So I would wear a bubba sling and he would just come with me everywhere. And because I was in like the children's industry, if I needed to feed, I would just like crouch behind the desk and, flop a boob out and get it done and keep going. And if there was, I probably shouldn't say it like that, should I, with all the different types of people listening to this, but anyway, that is how we operated. And all of the shop was filled with mums. So nobody really cared. But then he started moving. So that was when it got hard. Like I found the first 6 months relatively not easy, but could operate in that way. He could just be attached to me. And I was like, he could be attached to me at home or he could be attached to me here. We may as well do it here. But then when he started wanting to crawl and move around, oh my God, it was an instant nightmare. I was like, what am I going to do here? So I could no longer be at the shop with him for longer than 2 or 3 hours. We didn't have any family support because we were a bit tight financially. My husband was working overtime shifts nearly every day. And then I fell pregnant again really quickly. So my kids are only 17 months apart.
Oh my gosh.
And it was coming into Christmas. And basically I had the choice. So a few things happened at once. That happened. Kai started moving around and a large brand toy store opened about, I'm trying to think of what it is in
kilometers is fine. People can do that.
About 50 meters down the road.
Okay.
So like the size of an Olympic swimming pool down the road. And so business had got infinitely harder instantly. And the guy who owns the chain rang me about 3 months before he opened and said, he wanted to give me a heads up. They were coming in. He'd seen my store. He thought it was really quaint, really cute, but he wanted to give me a heads up because I'd be going under really, really quickly. And I wish I'd listened. Like so much.
So what did you do instead? At that moment, you get that call, right? And now you can see clearly. But at the time, what was your reaction?
I was like, game on. Like, that was my reaction. I was like, you can't tell me what to do. People will choose small over big. Like we will have it. And I took it as a challenge and I loved my shop and I didn't just want to give it up, but he was right. It was better. They had more buying power on things. He had a better location and slowly my clients would go and buy their toys there. And so, I made the decision about 3 days before Christmas to put everything to a half price sale, sell out all the toys and close it down. And so that was probably one of the saddest moments of my life. Like I still remember when it had all closed and I went back into the shop and it was all empty and there was, because the sale, everything was just messy and there was shit all over the floor and I just sat down on the floor and just cried for ages and ages and felt like such a failure. But the good thing that came out of that was through the tutoring center, I'd written a new curriculum that was pretty awesome. And so that then spanned into the next business that came after that.
Yeah. So it was the end of the toy store and obviously a sad moment. I mean, you just think about 24, 25-year-old you sitting there, you got a kid in hand, kid on the way or second kid already there. And this kind of dream that you had done from a place of wonderfully optimistic naivete has succumbed to the forces of capitalism. The big box store comes in and there you are sitting quietly crying on the floor alone. But it was the beginning of a new chapter that became really important. Actually, it was this moment that led to more transformation. So where'd you go from there on the tutoring side of things? Because that part didn't end.
No, that kept going for a really long time. And it was, in terms of success, the thing that led me to my first experience of it. So I started out licensing the curriculum that I'd written. So sold that to teachers just all around Australia, which was the perfect thing to do when I had kids. So my kids are now, I cannot believe how old they are, that they're 17 and 15, which is just bonkers to me. But at the time, like I wanted to be there with them, but there wasn't much, it wasn't like now where there's so many jobs available to mums and dads that want to be at home with their kids. And so being able to do that and being able to sell licenses and talk to people online and on Zoom, even having a website then was like a big deal. We had these horrible WordPress websites that you needed a developer to change one sentence on. And then I had to learn the code and all the things. But that started out as a license, and we ran that as a license for another 3 years, so until 2011. And then a lot of the teachers, because the teachers had brilliant teaching skills and they were all using it and to be their own tutors, most of them on the side of being full-time teachers, or they were doing it to give them a new career away from being in the classroom. And so they were asking business advice. So by that stage, I'd started a new tutoring center, but just a tutoring center this time. I didn't sign the massive, huge space lease. I was a lot smarter this time. I got about a quarter of the space. It was really, really, it was a lot tighter. We luckily learned from our mistakes. So I was running a really thriving tutoring center by that time. We had about 17 teachers teaching in there, and I had some of my licensees asking for all the business advice, which legally you can't do under a license. And then I went to this seminar that was like this business and wealth marketing mastery thing. And I went in there and someone had talked about franchising. And I still have all my notebooks from there. And I'd written like big capital letters, franchise. I just like circled it going, that's it. That's my ticket. That's what I'm going to do. And so I went to one of my clients had a very successful franchise. So I went into him and said like, Andrew, I'm going to franchise it. This is what I'm going to do. And he laughed at me. And at the time I was 27 then. And I'm much like I was then, like I am now, except I was even bubblier and gigglier. So I didn't like emanate serious businesswoman vibes. And he laughed at me and I was like, no, I really think that I can do this. The words he said to me is, to be an effective franchisor, you have to have a spine of steel and a heart of gold. He's like, your spine is bendy AF. Like I just know you well enough to know it will break you. And again, I was like, I'll show you. And so I started the franchise in 2011. And I was the youngest female to ever start a franchise system in Australia. So that was like my claim to fame that we got a lot of media from, which helped the growth really, really well. But that's how I started in franchising then. And that's what took me on the next 5 years.
Yeah, it's interesting how you kind of have progressively leveled up the complexity of the businesses that you run over time and the amount of people you serve through them. And so you went from this single location tutoring center and toy store to licensing the curriculum you had built, to then turning the licensing into franchising. And all along the way, you have these little like magic pixie dust of personal development type things that come along and show you a new path you can follow. So what was different about the franchise business from the licensing business? Like, what did it require of you at the time that changed?
Oh, I mean, I think like everything I do now is so easy because of franchising. It is, I think, probably one of the hardest business models to run. I've ran a lot of them, and it's a messy model. Works really well in food retail, but not so much in other things. So the differences with the license to the franchise was, as the license, it was just purely curriculum, and people were really responsible and took their responsibility for what they did once they got that. The second I turned to a franchise, because of the financial outlay, people would invest a significant amount of money to buy the franchise. And then it was heavier responsibility. So they'd be setting up leases, they'd be hiring staff, they'd be spending $5,000 on signage. Like the outlay was media. And for a lot of my franchisees, they were teachers. They'd never been in business before. Their risk profile really, really low. So this was out of a lot of people's depth. And so as soon as a lot of people start, they, crap their pants and look to me to solve everything for them. And so the weight of responsibility right from the very beginning, I could see was going to be really heavy. And then as it went on, like the ones I always say with franchising, it's like, if they do well, it's because they're awesome. If they don't do well, it's because I'm terrible. And that's the way you got treated constantly. And so it was really the weight of the whole thing was very, very difficult to hold. And there's no point in being a small franchise because it costs so much with the legalities and the infrastructure and the marketing and everything that you've got to do to hold the system itself. I knew that there was no point in, you either stay under 10 or you sprint as fast as you can. It's kind of like that messy middle. There's no point in being there. You'll make less money in the middle than you would if you just stayed small because of the infrastructure that you need. And so
which one did you choose?
Yeah. Well, I'm sure by this stage, everyone can guess which one I chose. I wanted to sprint. More is better, right? Bigger is better. More, give me more. And so I went for more. And it was it was a very different business after 10, like until probably about 14. Once we got to 14 locations, I could know everyone really well. I knew their partners and their kids and their hopes and their dreams and their fears, and I could coach them through it and work really closely with them. Once it got bigger than that, I then needed franchise managers and more team in there, and I became a little bit removed. And once I did that, that's when the sentiment really turned. And again, harking back to my youth, I got too big for my boots. Was the messaging that I was being fed a lot.
From who?
And
like, was it the actual thing you were being told, or was that the thing you were telling yourself about?
Not in that sentence, but people were saying, I didn't care about them anymore. I'd made enough money from it. And now I was no longer interested in them as people, and it got too big. And now I was just getting greedy. And yes, all of that was being repeated to me, which I took. Okay, I've gotten too big for my boots. Like I've got too far.
Calls back to those old messages. And
yeah. And so a part of me there had to like actually shut myself off a little bit so that I could keep growing it, or I'd just take everything way too personally, which I don't think I ever mastered in franchising. And so by the time we got to 40 locations, so we had an amazing year in 2014. Up until that point, I'd never really, I hadn't paid myself in all of my years in business. So 2014, so that was 10 years in, the most I had paid myself was $32,000 in the year.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So, people look at everything I did and go, oh my gosh, you did so well. You were so successful. But until that point, I just made it all the time. And we just constantly would reinvest into the business to try and grow and grow.
But why? What were you seeking at the time? Why go 14 to 40 so quickly?
Why? Because I could. At the time, I felt like it was too slow. I felt like I needed to go faster. Yeah, I needed the scale. I needed to be a certain size before anyone would invest. So I tried to get investment early so that I could hire the team that was experienced in franchising, because the cheapest salary was like $120,000, which I couldn't afford to pay someone for that. So I was getting people that were receptionists and trying to train them so that I could build them up, because I couldn't afford people. So I was trying to get investment, and a lot of people said, until you've got 50 sites, you're not really worth it to us. So I was kind of sprinting towards this magical level of being enough that people would take it seriously and help me.
And what was that in service of? What were you wanting for yourself out of all of that at the time?
Well, I loved what I did. So the way that our tutoring centers were set up, the specialty was to help children to learn to read that were otherwise struggling. So our most common children were about 7, 8 years old, mostly boys because of the nature of it, that had dyslexia, ADHD, autism, were just naughty. Was a lot of them that just didn't fit into the school system. And I could see that. And so many kids would come in and, they'd be crying in their first sessions and going, I can't do it. I'm stupid. I'm the dumb one. Like they'd just been fed this their whole life, which now that I'm saying it, I could probably relate to that a little bit. And I loved that when, you'd only spend a few months with those kids and you'd see them walk in and they were taller. They stood taller, and just knowing the impact of that, I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And, at the time we had thousands of children every week going through my programs, and that felt good. That felt really good in a way of the impact, but also in a selfish way as well, that I could see that the work that I had put in was worth it, was paying off, was making a difference in these kids' lives and in their parents' lives. So I wanted that on a big scale. I also loved the idea of doing something huge. I thought when, back in my Anthony Robbins days, when you did like the vision for your life, I laugh my ass off now when I look at it, because I think like, I don't want that. But it's, I wanted $10 million worth of property. I wanted to live in a waterfront, big McMansion house. I wanted to drive my 4-wheel drive Porsche. I wanted all of these things that I thought would make me feel like I did it. I was worth something. I achieved it. It was noteworthy. And so that's what I was going for.
Yeah. So, I mean, you did do it in many ways. You didn't do all of that necessarily, but in terms of building the franchise business, I mean, you did it.
Yeah, well, got to 2014 and we opened 15 locations in 9 months, which was awesome, but also what broke me. And so from that point, business-wise, it went really well. That was when I started making serious money for the first time ever, which was very exciting. For people that say money doesn't buy happiness, I'm always like, have you been broke? Like it makes it so much easier. And it was my first experience of not like running my bank account to the wire. So I really enjoyed that part, but it was just too big for what I could handle. Andrew at the beginning was probably right at that stage. The weight of it, I'm too sensitive. I couldn't let everything just roll off my back. I worry about all the little tiny details. I go into one of the franchises, and if the books weren't straight, if the desk was wrong, if the signage was wrong, like I'd see every tiny detail and just want to fix everything all the time. And so I would worry about it. And I got into the trap then of, I was working 12-hour days. My kids were still young. By that stage, Matt had stopped working when the franchise took off, which was fantastic. But I just became like this crazy worker bee, which is not the person that I wanted to be.
And when did you decide to change that? When did you decide to do something different?
So I made a deal with my husband that I wanted to get married every 10 years because I'm a sappy romantic. And in 2015, we had our first one. We've got our second one coming up in a few months, which is very exciting. But we did our first one in Nicaragua. So we went there with our 2 kids. It was the first like proper vacation that I was having in a long time. So we traveled quite a lot, but I always had my laptop on my lap. Whereas this one, I was like, I'm taking some time. I'd prepared everything, and I just wanted like this couple of weeks with my family to just be with them. And we had this beautiful wedding, and then the next day I was there, and I'd shared a bit on Facebook. And a couple of the franchisees had commented in saying, nice to see where all my money is going, and enjoy those cocktails that I've bought you. I realized at that stage that I'd become less than human to them. And I was like, it just had turned yucky, and I didn't want to fight it anymore. And so I decided in that moment that I would start to prepare for exit. And so that took, well, it actually didn't take that long. I went back, met with my accountant, And I still remember, I probably shouldn't say this out loud. You know what? They're never going to look at it. I went to the accountant afterwards and I said, you know what? If someone just takes over the liabilities of everything, I'm out. I don't care if I don't get any money for it. And luckily I had a very good accountant and very good lawyers that were like, okay, Tina, let's not just throw it away. But that was the stage I was at where I was kind of so exhausted and so heartbroken from it that I just had enough and I didn't want to fight anymore. And so in 2016, we listed for sale with a broker and we got 3 offers in the first month, which was fantastic. Wow. And then sold, we settled in Australian financial year. So in June of 2016, knowing now what I knew then, again, first time selling a larger company. I had sold a couple of just tutoring center locations by that stage, but I hadn't sold something big like this. And so I signed on to a 2-year earnout, which anyone listening has sold businesses on an earnout. They occasionally go well.
So let's assume that there are some people who have, and they get exactly what you mean. And then there are some people who haven't, and they don't get what you mean yet, but they might need to in the future. Yeah. What sucked about that?
So earnout wise is a way for the business to kind of, there's many different setups. Sometimes people will have earnouts in terms of just continuity of changeover to say, there's nothing dependent financially upon the performance of the business, but you just have to stay for a year or 2 or however long it's going to be to just make sure everything's okay. That's a good earnout. Those ones usually end up okay because most founders want their businesses to be in good hands and to go on and to do well. The one that I signed, which a lot of people do, is financial targets. And so I got 50% of the payout up front, and then the other 50% was tied to performance for the following 2 years of the earnout. So I had different targets I had to hit to get the tranche payments along the way. What I did not know then was that companies that acquire other companies, their job is to actually try and get you to not hit those targets so that they don't have to pay you the rest of the money. And so a lot of the resources that I had, a lot of the way that I'd been operating the business was no longer available to me. And so they were growing it in the ways that didn't affect my earnout. So the business still grew, but the way that I was tied to was kind of the rug was pulled out from under me. And that was something, it took me a few months when I was going, wait, what? This can't be how people wouldn't do that. But yeah, they do. So it was really, really difficult. And after the whole experience of franchising itself, I was just so, and one of the end points, so I had a 2-year earnout and that finished in June 2018 and it got to February and I did a Jerry Maguire. In Jerry Maguire where he's in the office and he's just throwing his toys, basically. That was me. I'm not proud of it. It was probably the worst behavior I have ever displayed publicly in my life. And I hope I never behave like that again. But basically I was in the middle of a very large office in Sydney and started swearing, throwing things, putting things around and staged a walkout.
And what was going on inside that led you to do that? It's so unlike most of how you are. And so, yeah, what was going on?
Completely. Well, everyone has their breaking point. Right? So I think to that stage, so I couldn't remember a time where my hands weren't shaking. My hands were shaky every day. I couldn't remember a week where I didn't have a headache. I couldn't remember the last week I didn't cry at some point. I was drinking every second day. And the days I wasn't drinking was probably because I was hungover. It was just bad. Yeah, I got myself into a pickle and I couldn't see how to get myself out. And I was determined to wait it out till the end. And in hindsight, I should have just waited out the time, not worried about the targets and just kind of, sat at home and let the clock tick over. But I wasn't thinking clearly enough. I was too emotionally worked up at that point to really make rational decisions. Is what I see looking back.
And is part of that because, what I imagine, and I've been through some similar stuff, is that you had your mind on the total number that they were offering you. There's a total number and that number means something to you.
Yes.
And when pieces of that number start getting taken away, it's like, wait a minute, that's not the deal we made.
Yes.
But if you read the contract, it's actually exactly the deal you made.
Yes.
And you don't realize it until after the fact.
Nope. Exactly.
Yeah. And so you were essentially throwing a tantrum against this thing that had you known differently, you might have made a different deal. But instead, here are your dollars flying out the door.
Yeah. And I mean, my lawyers did the right thing. Like, I still remember them at the time saying, I want you to view it as if the worst case scenario is going to happen. And I was like, no, that's not going to happen. So everyone, it's not like I didn't have good people preparing me for it. I just didn't listen.
And this is sometimes the downside of some of the personal development messages, right? Which is this whole, like, if you can envision it, it will happen. And if you just put one foot in front of the other, it's like, contracts suck.
Yeah.
When you make a contract, you should assume that everyone will act according to their incentives.
Yes.
And what they did was they acted according to their incentives.
They did. Yep. They did. Yeah.
And that sucks.
It did. It did majorly at the time. But I tell you, there's still a part of me, like, even when I think about it now, there's still a part of me that found my tantrum so liberating as well. It was kind of fun.
Yeah. It's like an emotional release.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you storm out. And you kind of have these multiple release points, right? The first one is the initial deal gets done. You get a chunk of money. And the challenge with an earnout is you go from the emotional release point to now you have to stick around this thing that you were done with 6 months ago, which is why you decided to sell it. Yeah. And they're saying, keep working hard. And if you work hard enough, you'll get more. And this is the toxicity in it, right? Is emotionally you're done. And financially they're stringing you along. And you say, I'm done with this, and you throw a tantrum and you walk out. What's the period like between being done with that and eventually finding your way to what you do now?
Oh, so many. I'm like, I needed you then, Barrett. Where were you then? Could have saved me a lot of heartache and a lot of money. But, that was to come later. So after that point, we basically disappeared. So we finished in 2018, and I wanted to make up for lost time. I hadn't become the wife that I wanted to be. I wasn't being the mum that I wanted to be. I knew my children were young enough that for that couple of years, they probably wouldn't remember long term if I changed my act now, of which I'm happy to say they have no recollection of that time, which is great. They just remember me as fabulous. So let that be a lesson to parents with young children. I'm sure it's in their deep dark somewhere when mama wasn't around for a couple of years, but I wanted to soak them up and get life kind of on track. So we literally ran away. We sold our house, we sold our car, we sold everything. We kept about half a shipping container's worth of stuff, and we traveled around the world for a year, which was the greatest year of my life. We spent an absolute fortune on it, and I regret nothing. Yeah, I don't know how I could ever top that. It was everything that I'd ever imagined fun to be. And so we left for a year and we went to 28 countries. But interestingly, probably not interestingly to you, because you'll be like, yeah, that tracks. I still couldn't not work. So I was really afraid that if I stopped completely, that by the time I come back, I would be completely irrelevant and no one would remember who I was, and I would have to start all over again. And so I started coaching, like, while we were traveling. So not a lot, but 1 day a week I would stop and I would do like 6 to 8 hours of a coaching block, and do that every Tuesday. I would go through and do that. So that is kind of how the next thing started, because I couldn't let myself do nothing.
Because what would happen?
Well, I would disappear into obscurity, but I would also be lazy and useless. So I hadn't met you yet.
Yeah. So there come those old messages again, right?
Yeah, always.
So the question I would have if I were listening to this is like, you took a year and went to 28 countries. So you don't have to share numbers, but just like in the context of your life, what amount of money did you receive from the sale in terms of like what it meant for you and your family?
So I'm not allowed to say the exact amount of money, but it was multiple seven figures. It was enough that we could get a house, that we could travel. It wasn't enough that I could retire. Great. So it was substantial and so much more money than what I had previously, but it wasn't like F off money.
Right. And there's an important difference there. And the audience of this podcast will mostly get that. But if they're like early in their journey, they'll be like, what do you mean that's not F off money? But it's a rude awakening when you learn the levels to this thing, because a couple million is in some ways torturous, because what it's enough for is to pay your tax bill, buy a house, and then put some money away and let it sit there for 30 years, and maybe have a modest retirement. But it doesn't allow you to stop working. And I, me, I don't say things, I try not to say things that trigger people just for the sake of getting attention. To the extent I have ever done that, the one thing I've ever tweeted that made people angry that I can remember was, even if you make $1 million, you're still going to have to wake up and go to work next Monday. So you need to think about why you really want that $1 million. And people got angry that it was insensitive and privileged and all of this, but I didn't have $1 million at the time. So it wasn't even from a place of like, you silly people, $1 million is nothing. It was from a place of, when you do the math on what $1 million is after the fact, you have to wake up and go to work again.
Yeah.
And it's just helpful to know that going in.
Yes. And I live in Australia where we pay 47 cents in the dollar tax. So a lot of that goes. But yeah, it was incredible, and I'm really grateful for it. And it made everything worth it to that point, but it was nothing compared to what I was going to make afterwards.
Hey, it's Barrett. As we take a quick break, I have something special I want to share with you this week, and that's telling you more about my group coaching program. The core of my work outside of this podcast is as an executive and leadership coach to creators and founders who have built their businesses to $1 million or more in revenue. But working one-to-one with high-level creators presented a little bit of a challenge for me. There are a whole bunch of other awesome creators and founders who wanted a way to work with me too. I was consistently either out of capacity or out of the budget range for creators at a stage or two earlier in their businesses. As a creator doing $100,000 to $500,000 in revenue, you've already built something meaningful, but scaling your business and impact takes more than hard work. It takes clarity, support, and a plan. And that's where group coaching comes in. Twice a month, you'll join a small, supportive group of mission-driven creators, people like me, to tackle your biggest challenges, build your leadership skills, and take your business to the next level. Applications are open now for my April 2025 cohort. Visit barrettbrooks.com/group coaching to learn more and apply today. Okay, so you started doing this coaching because you couldn't sit still, because you might become irrelevant and therefore no one would ever want to work with you again. You might end up poor and destitute and certainly useless.
Yeah.
Which all of which, of course, I say facetiously, but this started to plant seeds for what you would grow into being known for now.
Yeah.
Which is what?
What I do now is the only thing in my life that has ever happened by accident. Everything else I've been very, very planned for. And so what it first started doing was there was a lot of people that ran service-based businesses that wanted to scale and sell their businesses, of which I had just done. And so that is the coaching that I was doing. I am a systems geek. I love systems and automation. And so that was mostly what I was teaching people, how to systemize their businesses, because no one could ever understand how I ran a business of the scale that we ran on the level of staff that we operated. And a lot of it was because beautiful, beautiful systems. And so I would teach people that. And so that's how it really started. And then when I did my first course launch, so I was finding in a lot of the coaching sessions, I was repeating the exact same thing again and again. And people were paying me, at that time, I think it was about $1,000 an hour to do this coaching. I was like, you're paying me a lot of money. And I literally an hour ago just said word for word, like the same thing. So I thought, well, I'll get all of the common threads and put them into a program that people can just give to their staff to implement. And then we can just work on you when we're in the sessions. And people loved it. And so then they were like, well, how can I get some of that into my business? Even if people didn't want to sell it, they wanted like this internal online education system that they could use. And so I did my first course launch in late 2018. And in the first 24 hours, we made $11,000, of which to that point, I know for some people, $11,000 is not a lot, but to that point, the only way I'd made money is through selling time, or in the retail store. It's like you buy something for $2, you sell it for $4. Like it was very mathematical. I had never made money doing something that was so leveraged and so scalable. And I had, listened to a few podcasts with Amy Porterfield and James Wedmore and Brendan Burchard and these course people. And I'm not ashamed to say, like, I'd hear them talk and I'd go, bullshit, it can't work like that. Like, that's not real. This is some sort of scam thing or something. And then when I was like, oh, wow, this is like a real business that is a win-win for both people, that you can sell your IP and expertise and people can consume it whenever they want, in however way they want. And they're happy because they got what they needed, and you get paid, and you don't have to like deliver like, it blew my mind at the time. I was like, what is this heaven that I have found? This is amazing. And so then, as was my pattern, I got carried away and went for it from there. So started Her Empire Builder in 2020. So for the first couple of years, just rinsed and repeated and sold that course again and again. But for me, I didn't love that. I didn't love the model. I like to
Why?
I like to know people. I like community. I like connecting people together. And so when I started looking at the membership model, I was like, that's more my jam. Like I want more, I like to do good work with good people. And what I found with courses was people would come in, and I would meet people on the street or at conferences, and they'd say, I did your course, I loved it. I had no idea who they were. I didn't love that. And so when I started the membership, again, it's the only thing that I have done by accident and the only thing that's ever exceeded expectations. So I thought, like, if I get 10 people in the first one, that'll be great. And we got 32, and they were paying $1,000 a month each. And to me, I was just going, this is incredible. And everyone loved it. And in my past, like coming from franchising, where I felt like everyone hated me and it was never enough, and I was never giving enough no matter how much I gave, to then be in an environment where people were like, this has changed my life, this is fantastic, and doing well and getting results, I was just like, this is the greatest thing ever. And so it's just really grown from there. It has been now, so what's that, 5 years that we've been going with Her Empire Builder, and I have tried to stick with the same thing. So I know a boring business is a profitable business, and I've tried really hard not to break it. But it's essentially, like, we've made some modifications with AI coming in and all of those sorts of things. But it's essentially, the core of it has stayed the same, with that community and that connectedness of women that are using their thoughts to build IP and to sell it online. It's my favorite thing I've ever done.
Yeah, it's an amazing business. And this is now what you're known for, right? Is helping women build businesses that support their dreams and their goals. And it takes so many of the threads that we picked up on this story, and it brings them all into one thing where you can really serve people. What makes it different for you about working specifically with women versus just generally working with entrepreneurs?
Yeah, a lot of things. So I think a lot of the business programs that I did were filled with men. I mean, I'm going to generalize a lot here, but generally the men that I found in a lot of the business programs that I went to either didn't have or probably masked better their imposter syndrome. So they would put themselves forward for different opportunities. They would say what they wanted. They would market themselves more easily. They would sell more easily. Whereas a lot of women, I would talk to, and they'd be so smart and have so much expertise and so good at what they do. They're like, oh, I can't put myself out there. I can't sell to somebody. Like, they're just this keeping themselves small and keeping this secret, which drove me crazy, because we know that wealthy women change the world. When women have wealth, they make decisions that are going to affect their families and communities, and they spend it in a way that is generally more impactful than the way men have traditionally held and spent their wealth. I mean, we can see that with the American billionaires right now going on. So I'm very, very passionate about women having more wealth in the world. Like, even looking at philanthropy and their philanthropic traits and the way that women are dispersing is just so much greater generally than men. And so I like to do that. I like to see women that can have it all. I was just talking to a lady yesterday who her dashboard on Kajabi just ticked over $500,000. And she was saying it took her 6 months to make the first sale of $69.
Oh my
so
gosh.
Most people would have given up in that stage. But she's like, I kept going, And this has just changed our family's life. And she's been, helping out her mother-in-law who's not well, and like doing all of these different things that she's like, for me to have the ability to do that and to be this person is just life-changing. And so I love it.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, I have a default view on this. Listeners will know I had my mom on the show a couple episodes ago. And so my default example of leadership and entrepreneurship was my mom. And so it's always resonated with me. Your business has been very resonant with me, and the reason you do the work that you do and the people that you work with. And, I'm always striving for wholeness in the way that I represent ideas and in how I encourage people. And I mean, the way I interpret this is I struggle with a lot of the ways that men default operate as well. I just am different for some reason. And it's part of my story. It's part of why my work works, I think. It's part of why I attract the people I attract. And, if I give the benefit of the doubt to men with lots of wealth, it's like the world would be more beautiful probably if we just had both. If we had an equal number of women with the same number of wealth, then we'll really be able to look at what's the long-term impact of going and building rockets or investing more in technology companies and all of this kind of stuff versus giving money away, supporting nonprofits, building up communities, like all of the default ways that statistically end up being how women invest wealth to create change, and just hold them up next to each other. What works better, and have the curiosity to and humility to find out. I think that is worth it, and it's default good for everyone, And so I'm just such a fan of it. I believe in it so much, that message that you're sharing of, yeah, let's create wealthy women too, right? And let's see what happens when we do. I think it's beautiful.
Good things will happen.
Mm-hmm. So this kind of brings us to you being at what I consider your highest peak so far, fully operating from all of the power that you have now and all of the knowledge that you have and sharing it with others, and this beautiful business you've got in front of you, serving lots of people, making great money, and just on the relative to what you were making in the franchise business, what kind of income do you make now from what you do? Not, again, not in numbers, but just in terms of what it allows you to do financially.
Well, that I'm allowed to say numbers.
Okay.
Yeah,
it's up to you.
Yeah. So this is mine. So it took me 18 months to make the first $1 million revenue, not profit, but revenue. And so it got there relatively quickly, which was because of the profile I'd had previously. So I wasn't starting from scratch there. But now we do close to 2 million a year, and profit is sitting at about 1.2, 1.3. So it's an incredible business model that, is very sustainable, very leveraged, and just pays me more money than I ever thought was possible. And so a lot of people, I always have in the back of my mind, to build, to sell. But even if I was to never sell what I've created, it's far better than my previous one where I built to sell and sacrificed everything for the sale, the pot of gold at the end. This isn't that. It's not sacrificing everything for the pot of gold, but really trying to keep it as sustainable and as enjoyable as possible.
One of the things I adore about my work is that I get to be alongside world-class people as they deal with really, really deep inward challenges related to their success. And when you came to me, you were at another one of these transition moments. You had built what you have now. It was a beautiful business. It was people who default benefit from and appreciate how you served them. It wasn't the old problems of the franchise. And yet, here you were back in a spot where you felt like, I don't know if I can go on like this. So what was going on when you ended up reaching out to me the first time?
Was it 22 or 23? I think it was 2023, wasn't it? Yeah.
I think so. Somewhere in that range.
Yeah. I mean, it's I'm trying not to censor myself, but I'm also aware of how ridiculous it sounds.
But that's what this show is for, right? It's what it's for, is to acknowledge what really happens.
Yes.
Because it's so easy to feel like, oh, no one's going to feel sorry for me. I'm making $1 million a year. And yes. And I want to acknowledge that. It's a massive privilege and it's a huge opportunity. And
yes.
And
it also, it's deeply uncomfortable. And so being safe and uncomfortable was a completely foreign feeling to me. And so we got into 2022 And I found myself falling into the same sort of pattern. Whereas when I started this business, I vowed to never work like I used to work again. It was never going to happen. I've learnt my lesson. I will not let it happen. And then again, that's what I started kind of morphing into, is going, you know, how big can we go? What's even possible? Like, maybe I should make this a $10 million business. I bet you I can. And then making the business cases for those and doing the cash flow forecasts and looking at the team. But I was very determined to not create something heavy again, but to have something that was going to aid my life and not consume it. And so the reason that initially brought me to you was I didn't know what to do. I was at this crossroads in going, I feel like I should be going bigger and I should be seeing what I'm capable of, and I should get to the edge of my potential, and that I'm coasting right now. But also the idea of running a $10 million business and having a big team and getting back into it feels horrible. But then I couldn't quite hear my intuition in, I honestly did not know, am I not going bigger because I don't want that anymore, like truly in my soul? Or am I not going bigger because I had such a negative experience before and I'm scared of it? And if I'm scared of it, then I want to bust through that fear and I want to see what I'm capable of and I want to get there. But if I truly don't want to, I don't want to go through all that pain and get there to realize that it was the wrong way, go back. And so I felt very like confused, like I just didn't know the right way to go, and whether, you know, everything that I'd planned in my life to do with my riches and my wealth and my goals, I also was really happy. And I felt like I had everything that I could ever want. And this was it. Like you have the feeling of one day I'll get there. I like woke up and went, I'm there. Like this is it. I have arrived at my destination. Like I have a great marriage. I have beautiful relationships with my kids. I have a beautiful home. I have great dogs. We travel all the time. Like, this is so much more than enough. And then I felt like, well, everything's going to disappear then. Something very bad is about to happen and everything's going to implode, and don't take your foot off the gas, or what you've got now will disappear, and, you know, all of those things. So that is how I presented to you the first time. I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. Hell.
It's so funny to hear you repeat it back. You know, see, we talked about that early vision that you had written down of the big mansion on the coast and the car and all of that kind of thing that you eventually let go of. You had a more modern and more mature version of that going on at the time that we met. What was it at the time that you were kind of aiming for? What was all of it for in your mind?
I was living, actually, I don't even know if I told you we've sold our house since, because you changed my life, Barrett. My life is wildly different since our work together in all of the best ways. But we were living on a few acres. We bought that in 2020. And the goal was to knock down the old house and to build this beautiful $2-3 million architectured compound house that I could have. Like, the long-term view was that, you know, if my kids wanted to come and live there, they could at any stage of their lives. But then later in life, because I don't want to end up in a nursing home, that all of our friends could come and live in this compound together. And we would just, that was the long-term vision of it. Yeah, that was it.
And just to really drive this home, like, I've heard you on other interviews say, you know, I've got a life plan and I've got laid out everything that I want to do in my life and it'll all fit, and I'm going to die at 104, but Matt, my husband, he's going to die at 86. And so I've got this like 18-year period where I've got to account for not having Matt, and what am I going to do? And well, all my friends will just come live with me, and it'll be this beautiful compound of old women. And I just remember you saying all this to me, and I only repeat it back because you've shared it publicly. You know, I'm not sharing anything here that we only talked about in coaching, but I remember hearing that and thinking, wow, I mean, she's really convinced that like this is all going to happen. I remember there was one day where I just very innocently asked, what if you just let go of all that for a minute? And I wonder what it was like to hear that question the first time.
So I did, not so much now. I have let it go a lot, but my entire adult life have planned to psycho level planning, where I would do, my whole life plan, and actually still have the journal that has at the top every year, 2025, 41 years old, 2026, 42 years old. It lists how old my husband will be, how old my children will be, what we will do in that year, how we will travel, where we will go, what stage of life we'll be at, what our investments will be up to, like crazy level planning. I would always do 10-year plans, 5-year plans, 3-year plans, 1-year plans, break the 1-year plans into 90-day action steps, the 90-day action steps into daily task lists, put them all on my calendar, schedule my life in like 15-minute increments, like intense. It's no wonder I was tight, like so tightly wound because, well, I mean, I know enough now to know that gave me an immense level of safety. It gave me the safety and the illusion of certainty, which allowed me to perform the way that I did. And when we started working on, well, what if you just let that go and see what the world was going to give you, like loosen up a little, Tina. It felt free-falling. It felt like, I went bungee jumping once where I stood on the top and jumped off, and that was the same feeling of jumping into that unknown and letting go of some of that control and what that would actually mean, and not knowing which I mean, of course, no one knows what's going to happen. But the illusion of that gave me great joy.
Yeah. And it was playing an important role in your life, right?
Yeah.
You talk about this in your book that, when you had seen psychologists, that they said that this was a tool you developed in the face of so much uncertainty as a child. And this was a very clear explanation for it, right?
Yeah.
But I pulled this quote actually from your book that was so interesting to read, in hindsight, which was, enjoying the journey is vital to enjoying your life. If you're looking at the end game and suffering through what you're doing right now just for the prize at the end, you're doing it all wrong. And I just wonder, as I read that back to you from you in 2019, what it feels like to know that this is just inherently a thing we struggle with as humans. And you knew before you met me that this is a problem that other people are likely to face. And then here you are showing up on my doorstep, doing the same thing to yourself.
Yeah. It's because I wrote that book just after our year around the world. So I'd had a good break. I was in a good place. And then I kind of forgot again. Yeah. I actually read the book at Christmas time and was like, just to remind myself from that, like, eat, pray, love experience, like stay connected to that part of myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, isn't it interesting how we can so easily come back to, because in many ways, it's like you were more practiced at doing it the hard way.
Yeah.
At running yourself into the ground, and a lot of the habits you said that you had gotten into at the franchise point when it was really breaking you were things that you described to me again. Yeah. How hard you were working and the headaches and the habits and all of this stuff.
Yeah.
And yet, as we began to let go of some of it, there was a sense of free fall.
Yeah.
That was terrifying.
Yeah, really.
What allowed you to start stabilizing from that feeling? Like, what were some of the things, some of the tools, some of the exercises, some of the resources that you found along the way that allowed you to find a new baseline and begin to build back from there?
I mean, in one word, you is really the crux of it. So I've worked with tons of coaches my entire career. I've most of the time I've had different private coaches for a year or 2 years, and most often they're focused very much on the business side, of which, granted, is what I thought we were doing, is coming in to go like, teach me how to be a more effective leader so I actually want to deal with people, That was what we were coming in for. And I remember to use IFS, which I love, and that method has worked so well for me. But when we start, I mean, even like 6 months in, and you would talk about the different things and say, where do you feel it in your body? And honestly, I would go, like, nowhere. I don't know. Like, I don't know. I can think it. It's all in my head, but I couldn't actually, like, I turned off that entire part of me. And I went to a kinesiologist, and she said, like, your head and your body is completely separate. It's like it's severed. And that, I think, was a really practiced strategy that I had used for a lot of my life. And so to be able to get out of that honestly was awful. It was hard to have to think about all of the different things and what it means. And I remember thinking about thinking and the thoughts that you're thinking and what you're feeling, but then also thinking about the feelings and analyzing those and the different parts of ourselves. Like I'd never examined myself that closely and why I was doing what I was doing and how I was doing what I was doing and why and what I truly wanted. And I think I'd been sprinting for such a long time that was really comfortable. And now that I no longer had to sprint, what did that mean? And could I choose a separate set of beliefs and habits? And could I live a life that wasn't just, a dopamine cortisol onslaught constantly? And it was very uncomfortable, but very wonderful.
Yeah. I can remember one day you showed up and you said something to the effect of, I think you might have broken me.
Yeah.
I think I'm broken.
Yes.
I think I might never come back from this. And it's interesting now, it happens every time. It's like we have to really unpack what's going on. And you had just detached from all of that data that your body was trying to give you and that your experience of life was trying to give you. And I observed you start to see like, oh my God, that's why I'm acting like that. Or that's why I'm doing that thing. I don't want to do that. That's stupid, or like, I don't even value that anymore. Yeah. Like, I don't have to act that way.
Yeah.
And eventually it was like you rebuilt to this place of seeming, from my seat, a lot more free to really choose the way you wanted to show up. I don't know if you experienced it that way, but that was my observation of you at the time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Matt, my husband, so I've been with him since I was 18. So I think he knows me better than most of the time, I think, what I know myself. And I remember about probably 6-9 months into us working together, he's like, you just seem so calm. And I have never in my life used the word calm to describe you ever. But there was this, once we kind of went through it, this feeling of just okay, of just, I wouldn't have even had the ability to just sit with nothing. I always had to be doing something. I always had to be listening to a podcast, I would read a business book every week. Now, like I read one every month or when I feel like it. I don't have to do the things. Even now, like I go for walks in the bush for 2 hours with nothing, like no music, no nothing, just wander, which never would I do that. And I would feel like I was like 2 years ago, me would have felt like that was a massive waste of time, that there was so many more productive things that I could have been doing. I could have been making money. I could have been with the kids. I could have been with Matt, like just to take that time to myself, like what a waste of time. It is the most beautiful thing that I do for myself now. So it's all those little things that I know how I feel about things now. I can feel it in the different parts of my body. I can catch myself when I go into behaving a certain way that's not aligned with how I actually want to show up in the world. And because there's still always things that will trigger me into something and I'll say something or behave and I go, hang on. But I'm also not afraid to do that with team and with other people and wind it back and go, hang on, I actually didn't mean that. Let me wind it back. Let me take a minute and just answer that again. And so it's changed me in all the wonderful ways.
Yeah. I mean, it was fascinating watching the unfurling after we completed our work together. It was like you got to this place of peace and then so much movement happened from there. There's a couple ways I want to look at this, but one is I've observed you get or appear to get so much more physically well. Just you look vibrant, you seem like you're thriving physically. And that was something that you really were challenged by and that you were frustrated with. I guess I really wonder about how getting more in touch with what your body was telling you has influenced that physical health piece of your life.
So in American language, I've lost 50 pounds in the last 18 months.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So very, very different. Like a third of me is gone. And so from a physical point of view, that's very obvious because everyone can see that, which has been, it's been a weird experience actually, because a lot of it is so internal, what you're working on and what you're doing, but that's so public that I actually had to acknowledge it on my social media because I was getting messages every day from people going, what's happening? What are you doing? But also like the little things like never in my adult life have I not had pimples on my face. And
Mm.
my skin is glowy and beautiful. My eyes are brighter. My hair is thicker. Like everything just went well. And previously, I know that I was the worst for going, I don't have time to exercise. I don't have time to prepare the right meals. So I would just, grab whatever was there that I could have quickly because work was more important, or if the kids needed me, it's more important. So I would choose all of these different areas of life before ever choosing myself, because that was selfish. I know that sounds ridiculous. It felt really uncomfortable to do that. Whereas now I meditate and I walk through the woods and I prepare, like I learned to cook poached eggs because well, previously couldn't cook anything. So I've learned to make like the basic meals that feed me. I can cook a great steak, I can cook the good food, and I will take, like we giggled about this a little bit before we hit record, is I can pull a big work day still. I do love what I do. And once I get into it, I have ADHD, but the hyperfocus kind. So once I'm in, it's very hard. Sometimes I'll resent having to go to the bathroom because I don't want to break the flow, Whereas since our working together, this sounds so simple, but it made such a drastic change, is at 9:30 every morning, I have a half an hour block in my calendar for a break. I have a 1 hour block from 12:30 to 1:30. And then now I pretty much stop work most days at 3 or 4 o'clock. Whereas I used to work from 8 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock because my kids now are in high school. They do bigger days. So they don't need me as much. So I was like, well, if they don't need me, I may as well use the time productively and just go to work. But I wouldn't have a break. I wouldn't stop. And just doing
Don't
those
be
simple
useless.
things. Yeah. But stopping and stretching and doing yoga and a treadmill desk, all the things that we're told to do that sound so simple, I just didn't do.
I'm struck by a couple things. One is, does your business make any less money?
No.
So that's the first thing. And I know the answer to that, but the audience doesn't know that.
Yes. So last year, interestingly, we made $100,000 less than the year before, but $280,000 more in profit. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Right?
Because I wasn't going on all these like cockamamie ideas going, we'll do this, we'll do that, we'll try this contractor, we'll do that, this next big thing over here. Like I've made a lot more calm decision making.
Yeah. So I noticed that. It's also interesting to me just to observe your level of satisfaction with it. That the very same thing that was tying you in knots now is peaceful and you enjoy, and you're able to just settle into it and really embrace it. And you've launched a bunch of new stuff. It's not like you're not working hard.
Yeah. I mean, this will give you a little laugh. So I planned last year to have all of October with no projects, like nothing. So I could just wait and see. If I felt like doing something, I would do it. But if I didn't, maybe I'd just take a month and just like hang out. And then I got there and started a whole new brand and website, Course Quickies, which is like templates for course creators. And when I did that, go, Tina, come on, like just, but it's been on my list for years and I really wanted to bring it to life. So I'm not quite there yet. I still got some work to do.
Well, it's also like, from where did it come? What place did it come from within you? And was it this place of don't be useless and you'll never be good enough and all of this kind of thing? Or did it come from a place of this more centered ambition, this place of like, I'm fascinated by this. I want to do it. And, I'm not saying to anyone, don't be ambitious. Don't take on projects. Don't go see what you're capable of. I'm just saying, don't do it to try and fix some part of you that's not going to get fixed that way, right?
Yeah.
You and I have this in common where I don't know what to tell people other than that I could give you all the tactics in the world. I could give you the exact playbook you followed, and it wouldn't work because it's just not about that. The tactics came from you examining yourself, getting more comfortable with your past and owning your story and coming to realize all the ways that was still living through you.
And how did you, I know this is your podcast, but I want to ask you a question because I know you haven't interviewed a past client before. How did you actually do that? Like, what did you do in terms of, because I know when I showed up, I really wanted to change. I wanted to find the more peacefulness within myself. I wanted to have a business that was very aligned, but I was also difficult in that, I didn't want to get on a call and just bare my soul to you and cry and bring everything up. Like, I was very reluctant and guarded at the same time as wanting to do it, at the same time as being so disconnected from myself. Like, how do you actually work through that with someone that's like that?
Well, to be honest, it's very hard, to really be honest about it. I have to do so much work on my part not to take it on as my own, not to say I'm going to fix this person, because it doesn't work that way. I actually didn't do that much. You did all the work, but my work in all of that was I have to not act like it's my job to fix this person. Because the minute I start taking that on, the minute I get off center, and now we're off center, and I have to relearn it every time I start with a new client, I get freaked out when someone's like, tell me how to double my business. And I'm like, okay, I mean, if that's what you say you really want, we can do that. But I really don't think that's what's going on here. You would not have been stuck at this number for 3 years if it was just about what do you do next. I have folks like you who will show up and they're like sandwiched between meetings. They got a lot to do. This is another thing on their plate. I got to get it done. I'm trying to double my business this year. What are we going to do today to help me get there? And I just have to trust myself, honestly, Tina. I have to trust myself that it's okay if they think I'm a little crazy at first. It's okay. It's also okay if I don't like get them to bare their soul immediately. That's not the goal either. I'm not trying to learn all of your intimate secrets about your life and your past. What I'm actually trying to do is to get you to come into alignment with yourself. And there's all these different tools and exercises and ways of getting at that. And I think a lot of my job is to kind of like run little experiments. All right, well, if we approach it this way, well, did either one work? No. Okay. Well, I got to go find another way to get at it. And then the other big piece is, then I'm curious to know your experience of this. Sometimes I just have to say the hard shit. And I choose that very carefully because there has to be a lot of trust built up already. It has to come from a place of like my inner knowing, not from like trying to break you out of a thing. But sometimes I just have to say like, hey, can you turn your notifications off and like be here for a minute? Or, hey, do you notice that you've done the same thing 4 different times in your business now and not once has it worked? And I think very rarely as entrepreneurs do we have people in our lives who will say that to us.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
You're very good at it.
Thank you.
I mean, the result for me, like the end result is I have never felt more like myself than I do now. I've always been like a force. I would say, like, yeah. I've always had that. But I've always felt like I had almost a Jekyll and Hyde in me of part of me wants this, but part of me wants that. And I never knew which voice. And that's why, working with you in IFS, I think was so helpful in owning all of those parts and not feeling like I was constantly fighting against another part within me. That I think has been the biggest difference is being more at one with myself and accepting all of those parts and deciding at the time, like which part of myself gets the volume turned up and which part gets down. And even that I can articulate that in itself and know where that is coming from instead of having constant internal conflict. And I think that's where the calm has come from, which has helped so much in decision making, helped so much in having the peaceful feeling within me, has helped so much in just being able to make both big choices, but the little daily choices as well. That is what makes a life, and just calming my farm, just chill the out.
I think one of the great myths of entrepreneurship and wealth is that if you make enough money, it'll all just go away. And one of the things that I see repeatedly now, I mean, basically all my clients make over $1 million a year or close to it. They have sometimes millions of followers on social media. It's like all this outward signs of success that you might expect. Many of the people I work with have it. It does not automatically fix this stuff.
Yeah.
It doesn't change your relationship to yourself. If you don't take time to eat, it doesn't matter if you've got a personal chef cooking for you.
Yeah. I know a lot of people that are at the level of business that I'm in as well, and far beyond where I have gone. And I would agree that it's the old saying of what got you here won't get you there. I used to read like about how people would sabotage their success and that more fearful of success than failure. And I would think, what? Like that makes no sense. Like, of course, everyone wants to be successful, but it is often the work that you do to get yourself to the place where you want to get to. Once you get there is very, very different to then going, hang on, you have arrived. Like you can now enjoy, you don't have to sprint all of the time. And I do think, like, I know I'm in the minority in saying that, but gosh, I'm grateful for money. I am so,
yes,
the amount that I can do in my life. I mean, we have a foundation. We pay for 50 girls to go to school in Africa. My kids have so many opportunities that they wouldn't have. I mean, even down to the simple things, like the first sign of success that I ever had was when I bought my son blueberries, his favorite food. And I always, his little friends at the park would be eating blueberries and he wanted blueberries and he couldn't have blueberries because they were too expensive. And when we went into the supermarket, and even now when he goes in and buys blueberries, I still feel proud of that and go, I could buy my kid the blueberries. You have as many blueberries as you want, honey. Mama can do that. I love it. I think money can do really, really good things in the world if we use it well. And it does make things so much easier and so much choice. But that doesn't matter at all if we have that internal turmoil going on at the same time. It just sucks all the enjoyment out of it.
Yeah, and I see you enjoying your wealth a lot more these days. So I want to ask you one more thing about kind of your journey, and then I'll wrap up with my normal wrap-up questions. But what led you to sell the dream home and sell, in some ways, the connection to that dream?
Yeah, so that's in part of the big unraveling, since it's been a year since we stopped working together, just a little bit over. And mid last year, we went away and we were starting to look at building the new house, which was going to involve getting that big ass mortgage for the house to build it. And so I did all the numbers for it and everything that we were doing. And then, as is my practice now, sat down with my journal and went, do I really want this? What would it look like if I didn't have this? And in the end, it was like, actually, it would have been a beautiful, beautiful home. But do I want to add all of the extra work on that I need to do to pay for that house? Like, is that going to make me any more happy than what I am now? Is it going to improve the quality of life from what we have now? And I'm like, I'm pretty bloody happy now. Like, I don't think I need that. And so in a move, we've lived on acreage for 11 years. I never thought we would be off, but we then came back, we sold the house, and we've bought, like, I'd say a normal house on the street. It's not quite a normal, it's a normal house on the street, but it has amazing bush valley views. It's just one street back from the beach and my favorite bushwalk that I do. We sold our house for $3 million. We bought this house for $2 million. So it's the first time we haven't had a mortgage instead of going deeper into debt. And it's on the back step of my husband's favorite surfing, the kids' favorite surfing, my favorite bushwalk. Like, we've downgraded, but everything in life has been upgraded. And so, yeah, it was something I never would have, like, I would have seen me do that and judged me and gone, oh, is everything going okay in business? Like, why did they downgrade their house? Like I would have thought something was wrong for that. Whereas now it's like, we want to travel a lot. In a few years, I want to take a 5-year sabbatical because I don't want to wait until we're old. My kids are nearly moving out of house. One son will be leaving at the end of next year to come to America for college, which makes me sad. But, they're going into that next phase. And so for Matt and I, we had kids so young that, we didn't get all of that play that people often get together at the start. And so I don't want to wait until we're old, and I want to be a very present grandma. I would like the title of world's greatest grandma. And so I want to take like 5-year block where we can travel together and explore the world and just hang out and enjoy one another. And so this feeds into that dream. It's just, well, how can we lessen the burden and the responsibilities to be more nimble with it and more flexible with life? Yeah. I don't know what's going to happen, Barrett.
It's powerful to be able to say that and be okay with it,
Yeah.
The great thing about World's Greatest Grandma is you only need like 4, 5, 6 votes to win the award. So
right? You just need one. Awesome.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's been so fun to watch your journey. I didn't at all intend this episode to be, an ad for coaching or anything. It's because you belong on the show to begin with. Like, the people I have on the show also happen to sometimes be the types of people I would coach. But I do have a hard and fast rule, which is I will not have an active client on the show. And so now I've been in business long enough that I've got more former clients, and I have this weird problem in my business model, which is if I am uber successful at what I do, people go on, they don't need me anymore, and they live incredible lives.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that's my own problem to figure out. But what's beautiful about it is now, because of the wonderful relationship we have and what you've been able to do in your own life, it's like, what a wonderful story to get to tell. I'm really honored by it. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate you. I mean, I know it's not an ad for your coaching, but it kind of should be, because it's changed my life more than anything else that I've ever done. And I'm so grateful for it and so grateful for you.
I appreciate that. It means a lot to me. So I've got a couple wrap-up questions I always ask. I just added a new one because I'm not ready to share with the audience yet. I shared a little bit with you and you'll know why. My first question is, what do you think you're world-class at?
I wish I'd known that was the regular question, Barrett. I could have given you a lot more profound of an answer. I think probably connecting people and inspiring them to use their gifts.
I love that. And then these last two are the ones I always ask. So what is the most beautiful version of the future that you're working to build now?
The most beautiful future is probably more of the most beautiful present that I have. I want to continue doing things in small but meaningful ways. I want to get, like I just mentioned, our foundation before. I want to get more into that. I haven't given it enough or not as much time as what I have wanted to previously. So I'm really excited that I have the opportunity to be able to do that. But I mean, that's from a personal point of view, from a world point of view, I just hope we can be kinder to each other.
Yeah. And you said earlier, and I know that you strongly believe in this, and that you can help more women become wealthy through their own entrepreneurial efforts.
Yes.
And I know it's a huge part of it that's kind of inherent to what you do.
I mean, the ripple effect of it is just awesome.
It is awesome. My last one for you is, who are you becoming as a person right now in the process of the work that you do and the life that you're living?
I think I'm becoming the person that I've always wanted to be, that I didn't think was ever going to be attainable, or the person that I had kind of put off until I was old and successful and had made it. And now I'm trying to embody more of her now.
Love that. Tina Tower, you're a gift. Your people are lucky to have you. And I know there's so much more we could have gotten into, but it's a beautiful conversation. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Barrett.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Good Work. I'm your host, Barrett Brooks, and this podcast is produced by my friends over at Podcast Royale. My guest today was Tina Tower. You can learn more about her work at tinatower.com, where you'll find her courses, coaching, and insights on building an online business. You can also learn more about my coaching at barrettbrooks.com/coaching. Today's conversation inspired you to want to explore working together. I'd love to have that conversation with you. If you're a female entrepreneur looking to scale a thriving course business, make sure to check out her Empire Builder, which is Tina's membership program designed to help women create wealth and freedom through online education. You can also follow Tina on Instagram at Tina_Tower for behind-the-scenes looks at her life and business. As always, you can find the show notes at goodworkshow.com. They include all of the links and every other resource that we talked about in this episode, as well as all past episodes and episode summaries. If this is your first time tuning in, you can subscribe to future episodes in Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and also hit like and subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. If you're a regular listener of the show, or you've tuned in at least more than once, I'd love to learn more about your experience. Doing a little research and some interviews with listeners. So if you'd be willing to spend 30 minutes chatting with me, send me an email to bb@barrettbrooks.com. You can also send me feedback and thoughts about the show, ideas for future guests, things like that as well. If you enjoyed today's episode, please grab the link to the episode, drop it in a text message, and send it to just one friend or maybe a group text of people who you think would enjoy it. The way the show grows is always by word of mouth first, so I'm grateful for you helping to spread the news. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you on the next episode.